Hello and welcome back to Element 14 Presents. My name's Caleb. You haven't seen me in a while because I've been very busy working on one of the largest projects of my life. It's been about 10 years in the making and I'm finally able to do it. I bought 49 acres up in the beautiful mountains in Northern California in a very rural community. I'm only about 10 minutes from town, but I'm far enough out that I have no services here. I'm completely off-grid. There's no power, there's no water, there's no gas or telephone or internet service. It's just everything on my own and what I can produce here, which is amazing because as a maker, I want to build all this stuff. And I call it Bone Snapper Ridge. It's named after an old cat that I had. It's my favorite cat. His name was Bone Snapper and he was awesome. And this place is awesome. So Bone Snapper Ridge it is. The only thing that was here was some developed water and a cabin that I'm standing in right now that I've remodeled. The water was very developed. There's 2 streams that go through the property. There's 3 developed springs and 2 wells and about 17,000 gallons of water storage and a 1/4 mile of 1.25 inch pipe that connects all of it together so I can pump it from where the springs are all the way up to the top of the property where there's 3 more tanks that gravity feed back down to the house landing, which is also where I'm going to build the shop. And speaking of the shop, it's going to be a 30 by 60 foot steel building with 16-foot ceilings on it. And I'm gonna build an office in there and I'll be able to have everything that I want in there. And that's kind of the whole point. I wanted to build my own maker shop off grid and supply all my own power and everything to it. And that's where I'm at now. So I actually started this project just over a year ago, and that's why you haven't seen me. I've been doing all of this work. This video is just going to be kind of an update of everything that I've done in the past year, and there will be more detailed videos of some of the projects that are in this video and more to come in the future. And it's going to be a series, so stay tuned and keep looking out for these new videos coming out. I took possession of the property on August 8th, 2022. That very same day, we started moving equipment up and we needed to clear out a big spot for my shop to go because there was a huge hill and a bunch of dirt and trees and a whole forest that we had to take out. A friend of mine, Drew, who you'll see in the video, owns all of this equipment and none of this equipment is mine. You'll see maybe my car or my Jeep in the video, but all the dump trucks and excavators and backhoe and everything else, that all belongs to my buddy. I wish it was mine, but very expensive. On the second day of my possession of the property, all of the equipment was here and we got to work. We knew this was going to be just kind of a rough in, but we wanted to move all of that dirt and get it out before any rain showed up. He brought up an excavator, a bulldozer, a really cool military 5-ton dump truck, a skid steer, and a backhoe. And there was, I think, a second dump truck as well. And we just kind of went at it. He used the excavator to knock over some trees and cut some of them down, push the rest of them over. And once that was all cleared out, we just started digging and moving dirt. And that took about 2 weeks of digging. He would break up all of the dirt and put it in piles, and I would come up with a backhoe and move it down to a lower landing, or he would just load it directly into a 5-ton truck. And in some cases, with his big skid steer that he has, he could just dig right in and push that dirt right out. And like I said, we knew this was going to be just a rough in for the landing. And there was going to be another pass to it where I put in all the base rock and everything, and I'll show you that later on in the video. I mentioned that there was a small cabin. It's about 800 square feet, but that's much bigger than what I was living in. And the last shop I was in, my living space was about 350 square feet. So I kind of got used to living in that small space, so 800 square feet feels huge. But it was completely gutted. The previous owner of the property had been using it for something else, and it was a mess. It was a complete wreck. There was just stuff all over the place. They had kind of a kitchen set up, but not really. The bathroom didn't have a toilet. Everything was gutted out of there, no sink. It was time for a remodel as soon as that dirt was all moved and I could move on to this. There was a bunch of exposed framing, some missing insulation, so that was the first thing that I started on. I went and picked up some insulation and some sheetrock and kind of patched all of that stuff in. After I got all the drywall patched up, I mudded, taped, and sanded everything in here so it was a nice clean surface. I bought one of the cheap texture spray guns and sprayed all the surfaces in the house and then knocked it down with a trowel. It ended up looking pretty good. And then it was time to paint. I ended up renting a commercial paint sprayer, and that was amazing. I'm never gonna paint any other way. It just went so fast, and I was able to do like 3 coats around the whole house, and it looks great now. After the painting was all done, it was time to work on the floor. It was just bare particle board in here, and I went with gray vinyl click-together flooring. And then I went around to all of the joints and everything in the house, caulked everything up, put some finish paint on it, and then I had a very clean slate. There's still no power, there's still no water, there's still no toilet, there's nothing here. But I was able to move my bed in finally and have a nice place to sleep. And I know I mentioned there's no toilet in the bathroom, but outside there is an outside bathroom. It's got a door on it and everything, but it is outside, no insulation, it's kind of open air at the top. But there's a real toilet and a shower in there with a camp hot water heater. So I had that available to me while I continue to remodel the house. Now I just needed a place to work. I had an idea to build a wraparound desk in the living room portion of the house. I still had access to a shop down in town, so I welded up a bunch of brackets, designed a desk in CAD that would custom fit inside of there, bought all the wood and put it all together, put some trim on it, and yeah, it looks great, and it's been serving me up until now. Now that I'm living in the house, I need some power. So far, I've been running off of a generator and a very small solar power system that I built with 2 100-watt panels, a 2,000-watt inverter, and a 100 amp hour battery. All the just cheapest stuff I could find so I could have any amount of power in here. My cousin, who is a commercial electrician in Southern California, came up for a few days, and we spent all of that time wiring the house. We put light switches in, outlets, lights in the ceiling, a real breaker box, everything that I need for when the real power shows up, it'll be all ready to go. I tied my small solar panel system into the breaker box and everything turned on, and I had light switches. That is something that I will never take for granted again. To be able to walk up and turn on a light is amazing after months of living in the dark with a headlamp or dragging around a single light bulb on a stick. Now that I'm living in the house and I have power, the very next priority is plumbing. Remember, the only water I have is outside. If I want to drink water, I want coffee or wash dishes or anything like that, I have to put shoes on, go out in the cold, and get water there. There was no sinks in the house, but there were the stubs in the floor that I left, and so I just tied into that under the house, and the drainage was all still there, though it wasn't hooked up to the septic tank. And on that same day, it started snowing, which is very rare for Northern California. And in my area, we're generally pretty warm. Maybe we get some rain, but it really started snowing. Compared to other parts of the country, the amount of snow that we got here was not very much. It was about 1.5 feet, but that is just unheard of in the area that I live in. Luckily, we finished all of the outside work for the plumbing right as it started snowing, and the rest of it was all inside. The reason I brought up the snow is because the very next day, it got really cold, froze all of the stuff that was outside, burst my hot water heater, and my toilet was a complete solid block of ice. In the bowl, in the tank, everything was solid ice. I was stuck here for a few days with no water and no toilet while I waited for the snow to stop and melt enough that I could drive down to town and get more supplies. I was able to melt some snow for water to drink and make coffee and that sort of thing, but other than that, I didn't have any water. Everything was frozen. When it finally melted, I went down and I bought some insulation, fixed all the pipes, and I also went and bought a toilet that I could hook up inside the house. And then remembered that the sewage from the house was not tied into the septic tank. So, snowed again, and I was outside digging through all of that to connect the house septic lines to the septic tank. And then it just kept snowing and snowing and snowing, and it would melt off a little bit and snow some more. And I was just kind of stuck up here for quite a while. Every once in a while, it would melt off enough that I could drive to town and get more supplies, and then I would come back up. I would melt off a little bit that I could go cut some firewood. I had also injured my knee in the winter, and so I just kind of ended up holding up for the rest of the winter until the snow melted off and I got some dry days so I could get to the next part of the project, which would be getting ready for the big solar setup. And there was a lot of work to do for that. The first thing that I had to do was clear out a bunch of trees. I got my buddy back up here. He brought an excavator and his skid steer and some of that equipment, and he's also a CDF trained forester. So he was cutting down some trees and he taught me how to do it so I can do it now and in the future. And what I had thought was, cutting down a tree, getting it on the ground, limbing it up, cutting it up into rounds. For me, by myself, that would probably take me at least a day per tree, if not more. But this guy, with all of his knowledge and all of the equipment he had, by the time the tree hit the ground, it was about an hour until the tree was completely gone. So I'd only planned to have him cut down 2 or 3 trees, but after I saw how fast that went, I just said, let's keep going. And we cleared out a big spot for the power shed, and then we worked our way around the house, behind the house, and cleared out a bunch of forest there for fire prevention, and even cut in a fire break road. And then any trees that were behind the shop, potentially where the shop's gonna go, anything that was leaning towards the shop or would be hard to fall once the shop was there, we just cut all those trees down as well. And this generated a lot of debris. So I called and got all the proper burn permits because it was still kind of raining, everything was wet, and it was burn season. So I got the permits and we started a big burn pile, and I didn't know what to expect. There was so much debris. He just kept using, with the excavator, just dumping more and more stuff on the fire. We had this huge fire. It was really amazing, and it burned for like 2 weeks straight. It was really cool.
Are you an engineer, electronics hobbyist, or maker? Join the Element 14 community, where you can learn about new products and technologies, see cool projects, and connect directly with the people that make the products and engineers that use them. Join now!
When we first started clearing out the trees, there was a spot where there was this old abandoned trailer that the previous owner left here. And I wanted to just move it or get rid of it so I could build a different building there to put my batteries, inverter, and all of my solar equipment in that and have kind of like a power shed. So my buddy just kind of crunched it up and hauled it off to the dump. That was great. And then he cut in a little road that I was going to build the new building on. And after a bunch of research, I realized that the most cost-effective way to do this was a 20-foot shipping container. So I found one, I bought it, we brought it up here and installed it, and I proceeded to build a smaller room inside of that. It was about 2/3 of the building, and I put R14 insulation all the way around and 2-inch rigid foam insulation on the ceiling, and then covered all of that up with plywood. I'm going to build a door on that, and that will be kind of the clean room where all of my solar equipment is. The rest of the shipping container is going to be the generator room, where I'll pipe the exhaust out and have fresh air come in so the generator can run during the winter when it's raining or snowing, and it'll all be safe inside of there. I'm calling that power shed P.A.W, since I'm my own utility for power and water, and this place is named after my favorite cat. I thought it was appropriate for Bone Snapper's paw. Paw is about 170 feet away from the house and about 40 feet lower in elevation. I needed to dig a trench from there all the way up to the house to a point where I could distribute that power to the house and over to the shop when the shop is built. Drew brought some more of his equipment up and we got to work digging a trench. I put the one end at the far end of the house and we dug a trench past the house all the way down the hill to where Paw is, to the back corner of that shipping container. I used 2-inch and a 1-inch conduit. In the 2-inch conduit, I had 3 2-aught aluminum wires for my 240 volts that needed to come up, and that was all sized appropriately. And in the 1-inch, I had 8 Cat5e network cables so I could have data back and forth between the shop, the house, and P.A.W. Since P.A.W. is a shipping container and it's made completely out of steel, I decided I was going to have that as kind of like my server room as well. All of my data, all of my drives, all of my servers, everything like that is going to live down in there, so it's protected from fire, at least a little bit if fire does come through here. Once all of the conduit was in, I had to terminate both ends. On the P.A.W. side, I bought a weatherproof metal box and I attached it to the side of the building and drilled a hole all the way through, and that's where my wires and everything went into that side. And on the house side, I built a backer board, dug a hole, poured some concrete, put some posts in it, put some 2x8 on it where I could mount my breaker panels and a termination point for all the network cable. I also stubbed out some conduit that was pointing towards the shop. When the shop gets built, I can just attach to that, run more conduit over to wherever it's gonna go, and then I'll have the distribution for that. Through all of the time that I've been here, I've been doing a lot of research and getting bids and quotes and talking to vendors about my solar equipment that I'm going to buy. I ended up going with a company called Victron, and I chose them because they have probably the biggest community of support, and most of their software and a lot of their documents and everything that they have, they release as open source, and they're very open with their data and how everything works. So that fit me perfectly. I sized the system based on running my largest machine for 5 hours straight, and that happened to be my 4-foot by 8-foot Avid CNC router. At full tilt, which I'll probably never run this at, my calculation came out to 240 volts at about 60 amps, and that's what I needed. And for the batteries, that was about 28,000 watt hours of batteries. If I remember correctly, I think that worked out to be about 14,000 watts total with that machine running full tilt, and I couldn't find a good combination to get 15,000 watts with the Victron equipment. So it wasn't too much more, and I ended up going with two 10,000 watt inverters. I'm setting them up in a split phase scenario, so each one of them is providing 120 volts. They connect together via CAN bus and they communicate and synchronize, so they output 240 volts, and I get out of that about 83 amps total. I also went with the Victron Link system, which is a really cool bus system that has distribution points and fusing and even a shunt that can go in the middle that I can collect data out of, so I know all of the watts going in and out of the system, if it's coming from a generator or if it's coming from the charge controller or how much is going out. It's a really cool system, and I have access to all of the data in there via Modbus TCP. I also picked up their Serbo GX, which is a data collection point. It's some kind of small computer. They provide an image for a Raspberry Pi that you can just install and run the exact same software that runs on this device. But this device already has all of their proprietary communication systems built into it. It's got 2 types of CAN bus and 2 types of their proprietary communication protocol hardware built right into it. So I just bought that, and I'm able to communicate with that and pull all of the data out into an InfluxDB database, and then, I can make graphs and look at all of that stuff. I decided to make all of my own battery cables. The amount that they charge you for a battery cable is really high compared to what it costs to just buy the raw cable, buy the ends, and even buy a 12-ton crimper to make them myself. So I invested in the tools, bought all of the equipment, and I had to make a bunch of battery cables, but it was very fun, and I learned a lot, and now I have all of the equipment to make more battery cables, if I ever need them. I got all of that equipment tied together, and then I had to connect my generator to the inverters because they're inverter chargers, and it can charge the batteries through the inverters. And I also connected the outputs of that to a panel inside the power shed that combines it there into the 240 volts and sends it up to the house. I then tied that part into the house, was able to turn the whole thing on, and then I had all the power that I wanted. Up until this point, I had no way to refrigerate anything. I had a very small 12-volt cooler, but that was just enough for like coffee creamer and a salad. But now I have a full refrigerator, and that, again, something I will never take for granted is having a refrigerator and being able to buy all the food that I want, have leftovers. It's amazing. It's absolutely life-changing, and it's probably the best thing that I've done here is have a refrigerator. So the last part to that system are the actual solar panels. I ended up buying 16 540 watt bifacial panels. It took them a few weeks to arrive, but they all came on a really giant pallet. Now I have to build all of the racking so that they're all set up and facing the right direction, and I want to try to build them so that they will tilt and I can adjust them for the different seasons of the year. That is one project that I haven't been able to get to yet. I hope to get to it before full winter starts, but I may not be able to. So I took 6 of those panels and just kind of set them up, and just 6 of those panels are outputting as much power as my generator was. I was getting about 2,500 watts out of my generator, and with those 6 panels, I'm getting something like 2,600 to 2,800 watts in full sun, and it's amazing. I haven't turned my generator on in weeks, and that's the first time. For almost that whole year, I was charging my batteries off of a generator, and fuel here in California is about $5 a gallon, and I was burning about a gallon a day. And so I had some of the most expensive electricity that I've heard of. Once that huge milestone of having a refrigerator working inside the house was done, it was time to get back to working on the shop. Again, my buddy Drew came up with his equipment, and we dug a rock quarry down the way, and we brought up about 75 dump truck loads of rock from the quarry up to the pad. We rented a D4 dozer and a pad foot compactor, and I had those for 3 days, and that's all we did. He drove the D4 and I drove the compactor. We'd put down a layer of rock, wet it down, and I would come over it and pack it down, and we just slowly brought up the building pad to where it needed to be. It's perfectly flat, and it's very, very compacted and very hard. As soon as that was done, I contacted my concrete contractor. He got the plans for the building from the building contractor, and he came up and just about a week ago laid out the building, started digging footings. I'm also putting a retaining wall behind the shop, so that's going to be done first. There will be more content about that, so keep your eye out. That's all I have for today, and that brings us up to current. There's forms outside waiting for concrete, and while I wait for that concrete, I'm making this video here for you today. I know it's a little bit different style of content, and I'd love to hear what you think about it. There's also going to be a link to a blog series that I've been doing about Bone Snapper Ridge. I talk about specs and talk with the community about different ideas and how I should do something, or if it's a good idea or a bad idea. Anyways, I'm glad to be back. I hope there's going to be more projects in the future, and until then, keep making.